Bonjour, je m'appelle Hugo Prévost. Bienvenue à Entretiens journalistiques. Bienvenue donc à ce 28e épisode de la série Entretiens journalistiques, des rencontres avec des personnalités marquantes des médias d'ici et d'ailleurs. Aujourd'hui, édition spéciale du balado. On va faire une entrevue en anglais car je reçois évidemment une invitée anglophone. Alors vous excuserez peut-être mon anglais avec un fort accent québécois. Ceci étant dit, je vous souhaite une bonne écoute. So I'm glad to receive today on the podcast Tracey Lindeman. Hello, Tracey.
Hi, Hugo.
So, Tracey, you are a freelance journalist. You're also, what I'm taking from your website, you're a content creator, you're an editor, you're also a storyteller. And I want to know, what does a storyteller do exactly?
Well, obviously you tell stories.
Okay, well, how is it different, for example, from being a journalist?
A lot of the journalism work that we do in the daily news is very, lead driven. Okay, there's a short lead, and then this is what this guy said, this is what this lady said, this is the background, some context, bam, your story's done. Mm-hmm. Storytelling, I think, is more about trying to tell a narrative story, to try to integrate some more literary elements into the stories that you write. And make it a little bit more not like a mini book, but just maybe a little bit more interesting than daily news stories that we're so accustomed to reading.
Okay, so are we talking about long-form journalism here, or is it something else?
It could be long-form. I tend not to write super long-form stuff, not because I don't want to, but just because I haven't had really the opportunity to do so yet. Mm-hmm. But I do write a lot of features in the 1,000 to 1,500 or 1,600 word realm. So they're like short features.
And is it something that you can do or have the opportunity to do every day, a few times a week?
To write those long stories?
Yeah.
Well, it depends. Because I'm a freelancer, it really depends. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I have them every week. Sometimes it's every couple weeks. Sometimes it's a couple times a week. That's kind of the nature of freelance work, is that you never really know what you're doing from one week to the next.
And I wanted to talk about freelancing. That's a good opportunity to talk about this. We've had some freelancers before on the show. We had some, if I can use her quotes here, regular journalists, which are full-time journalists, maybe something like that. Wanted to know, was freelancing your choice? Was it a circumstance that made that, I'm going to try to be my own boss, for example, and decide to go into freelancing? Was it a clear choice on your part?
Yeah, that answer for me is going to be different from another person's, because what I've learned is that every person has a really different reason for being a freelancer. Yeah. And I have seen on Twitter, for example, a lot of people being like, well, I lost my job, I'm going to be a freelancer for now. Like, it's a consolation prize. Mm-hmm. And that's fine. Like, some people want to be staff journalists and that's their goal. And it really sucks when they lose those opportunities. But for me, I think that freelancing was a choice for a few different reasons. Freelancing was a choice because I didn't have a staff job per se at this news organization, but I was basically treated like staff, where I worked full time and I was there every day. But I didn't actually have a staff position. But let's just say I was a staff person, mm-hmm. for all intents and purposes. So when I did that, I learned a lot about journalism. I learned a lot about myself, and it was a super informative and invaluable experience. But from working there, I really realized about myself that I felt creatively stifled, and also working in an office environment, especially with a lot of loud competing personalities, I found to be really draining on my energy and will to keep working. So for me, being independent being a work from home type person was really appealing because I had a lot more control over the circumstances and environment in which I worked. So that's the upside. And there's also other upsides including you get to maybe shop around to different publications, write publications that you wouldn't necessarily be able to if you were a staff journalist. And that's really interesting, but it's also really insecure from a job perspective because you never know like who's going to say yes or no. And I think a lot of freelancers can probably agree that when you get one yes, suddenly you receive like 10 other yeses, and then you have this huge crunch where you have to do a million things that you weren't anticipating all really, really quickly. And then it's followed by these long periods of not doing anything. So the goal as being a freelancer is really to try to keep, for me anyway, a steady amount of work. And that's why, as you said at the beginning, like I call myself a journalist, a content producer, and all these other things. It's because I do kind of subsidize my journalism habit with content production. So I call it subsidizing my journalism habit because it's kind of true. Like content is so much more lucrative than journalism. It really is what pays my bills.
It's quite an interesting way to say that because there is a feeling, at least for the last few years, that journalism is becoming a hobby more than a job. I mean, yeah, like you said, there's some staff journalism, and I mean, I work at CBC. I know how it is, and you work there too. But yeah, there's a feeling that I want to write about this and about that, but it's not when it's coming from you, and it's not from your desk editor, for example. It's not sure that your topic or your subject will be accepted first, and then, well, where do you publish it? And are you going to stay in journalism even if you know that the topics you want to write about aren't going to pay? Or will you do like you did, say, I'm going to take other jobs, not on the side per se, but you're going to take other jobs to pay, again, in air quotes, to pay yourself for being a journalist. Mm-hmm. So there's a point maybe where you're telling you're telling yourself, I like being a journalist, but it's more like a hobby than a job.
It's not a hobby for me.
Even if it's work, it's still work to do. But yeah, it looks more like an expensive hobby instead of a job.
No, I don't think it's a hobby at all.
Oh, okay.
And I never said that. I said it's a habit. It's a journalism habit. As in an addiction. Like, I can't stop doing it.
I see.
And like, yes, I think that a lot of people who are journalists who have never done content, so people who've always been strict journalists, which was me up until 2015, they kind of look at content like the other side of the chasm. Like it's a totally different, totally foreign beast. Like it's not at all related to what I do. Like I have integrity because I'm a journalist. I don't do that other stuff. The people who do that other stuff are untalented shills. And some are untalented shills for sure. And for some reason, they still get paid to do it. But as I learned in 2015 is that it's possible to be on both sides of that chasm if you can balance it well ethically and emotionally from a personal perspective. So for me, when I was working at the news organization, and I was freelancing while still working there. So I was basically working 80 hours a week towards the end. And that's at the point where I was like, I have to pick the one thing I like the most and do that because doing both of these two things is killing me. So I chose freelancing. And really it was the content production that I did that enabled me to become self-employed. Mm-hmm. So it gave me a lot of agency, in fact. And it kind of gave me permission to have this baseline salary so that I knew that I would be able to pay my rent and do my groceries and pay my bills always. And that on top of that, I could do journalism stories that really mattered to me instead of just taking whatever came my way. So in that sense, I think it was actually a really empowering choice. And because in my past experience working for this large news organization, like I wrote stories every day that I didn't care about. And that's kind of the nature of doing daily news, is that sometimes you really care about the stories and sometimes you don't care at all. And like, I would be lying if I said that I didn't do that at all now. Like I still do tons of stuff that I don't really care about, but it doesn't feel like as big of a compromise as it used to, because I still get to do these things of my own free will that I pitched or that were assigned to me that are about topics that I really care about. So yeah.
So another thing I want to talk to you about is your specializations in urban planning, transport, in architecture, in urbanism. You worked for Motorboard, which is a website belonging to Vice Media. You're now working for CD Lab. Quite a few articles published for those two publications. You also have a newsletter called Point A, which is published once a week. I wanted to ask you about that newsletter specifically because, well, first of all, it's free. So I wanted to see, is it something to boost your personal branding? Is it something to simply inform people about the topics you care about? Is it a mix of the two? Is it something else?
Yeah. So I started Point A, I guess it was at the last week of December was the first newsletter that I sent out just as a test. And then I started doing it properly in January. So I guess it's been a few months. And I originally did it because I was writing these stories and I had all these ideas about these topics like transportation, urban planning, urban development, that I wasn't turning into stories necessarily, but they were thoughts that I was entertaining. And I figured, why not try a newsletter just to see what happened. It was kind of an experiment. And then as I did it more and more, it kind of felt like one of the few things that I did in my weekly work life that was fun, quote unquote. And I don't mean to say that I don't find my other work fun, but it was writing that I did purely for pleasure. Like some people write screenplays, some people write books, and some people keep diaries. But a lot of people, even people who aren't writers, write for the pleasure of writing. But because writing has become my job, it's not really something that I find a lot of pleasure in doing as an extracurricular activity, for better or worse. And so this newsletter is actually a channel for me to rediscover that writing for fun, and I publish it myself, so I don't have to pass it through an editor who has to give me back their feedback. Everything else I write goes through editors. So yeah, this is an opportunity for me to have a little bit of fun, a little bit of freedom with this kind of stuff. And there was some consideration given at the beginning of do I want to monetize this? Because that's kind of the thing now, right? Like everybody's starting a newsletter and everyone wants $1 a month or whatever for the newsletter.
Yeah.
And they want to sell ads and they want to do this and sponsorships and so on and so forth. And that's totally fine for the people who want to do that. And by all means, it's probably a smart decision if you have the energy to do it, trying to monetize your work so that it can live without a specific platform. So if ever you do lose your job, which in media is almost a guarantee, maybe you'll be able to keep your audience and still be paid for it. You know what I mean? So monetization is a really interesting business model. But number one, it's so much work. Like, I thought of how to do it, and I was like, okay, I got to sell ads, and I got to reach out to people and see if they want to give me money, and then I have to do this, and I have to get a subscription, and I have to bug people about subscribing for free. Not for free. I have to subscribe. I have to bug people to subscribe and give me money to subscribe for something that they could probably just follow me on Twitter and get the gist of for free. So, like, it felt like, why put myself through all this additional work for very little gain, really, because it's not like I have hundreds of thousands of followers. Mm-hmm. I have some followers, and maybe one day I'll have more followers, but I really don't think I'm going to make a lot of money off this. So I decided recently, like a conscious decision, to not monetize it. Mm-hmm. Unless something happens and I become super famous, and then maybe I'll try to make some money. But I really sincerely doubt that's going to happen.
So it's mostly, like you said, for fun, but still it's a way to promote Tracey Lindeman as a journalist on the internet.
Yeah.
And how's the feedback so far from your readers?
People seem to like it.
If you have any, I don't know if there's some feedback from...
Yes. Well, Bob from Maine. No. Like, I only started it 4 months ago. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know, like, what a good barometer is for readership. I'm obviously, if you see how many people follow me on Twitter, I have like maybe 3,200 followers, which in the grand scheme of things isn't really that many. So, I'm not like hinging my hopes on like converting a bunch of people.
Yeah, I see. But this leads me to another question about your personal brand, because as a freelancer, you are who you are. I mean, your name is not attached to another media. I mean, at least not permanently. So you have to think about reaching yourself out to other people, other potential clients. And how does it work? Do you send them an email saying, I have this idea for a story, are you interested or not? Or is it something more complicated than that?
Yeah, pitching, it's strange because a lot of people think freelance and think you're like a constant pitch machine, which when you're exclusively a freelance journalist, I guess you kind of are. But because I balance it out with some other things that are more steady, I don't always have to be in pitch mode, which is really good for me because I really suck at pitching. So, yes. So in principle, the idea is that you, a journalist, go to this person who is an editor at a publication that you want to write for, and you send them an email and you say, hi there, I have this really great idea for you. And then there's like all these different competing pieces of advice on how to best formulate a pitch. So most people would say it has to be like basically one medium-sized graph or two short graphs that summarize an entire article that you have not done all your research for. You probably haven't even done interviews for. Yeah. So you're kind of proposing a hypothesis. Like, I think this is what the story is going to be. So you do that, and then they might answer you the next day. They might answer you within an hour. They might answer you in 2 weeks. They might not ever answer you. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have no idea if they got your email, let alone that they read it and considered your idea. So it takes a lot of confidence and strength to work in that kind of environment and not let it kill you, really, because it's hard. Like, you feel like talented. Obviously, you wouldn't be doing this if you didn't think that you had some kind of special talent. But you feel like the only way to get published is through these gatekeepers who say yes or no. And sometimes you feel as though they don't really take into consideration, like, all of the things that could possibly make this a great story and why you're the right person to do it. So that's the challenge too with pitching, is that you have to really encapsulate the essence of the point of the story. And sometimes you have to arrive at that point before you've done all the work to find the point in earnest. So
That's
it's very challenging.
That's a bit of like the chicken and the egg thing. It's a bit about, you have to not invent the point of the story, but like you said, you have to define it before defining it. It's a bit strange, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's even more challenging now because so many editors have really vague ideas of what they want. Like, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I want a story that wows me, that like no one has ever done before, and I'm going to pay you $400 for it. So it's like something that no one has ever done before that totally wows this editor who probably gets 100 pitches a day.
Yeah.
And they're going to pay you shit for it. Like, you have to be a glutton for punishment, I think.
So, Tracey, I want to go back to writing about cities, writing about, like we said, transportation, urbanism, everything related to this. Because, like we said, you recently wrote, and you're still writing about this. But where does it come from? Because I'm sure you did not pull this out of thin air, of course.
No, I didn't pull it out of thin air. When I got the motherboard contract to write about the future of transportation, it was kind of like a perfect combination of all of my personal and professional interests. So basically, like to begin with, I'm a huge public transportation nerd. Like I've been to a bunch of different cities, and whenever I travel, I try to take public transit. So I already had that existing interest. But then, like, it goes back even further to the beginning of why I became a journalist, which was I liked writing about communities. Mm-hmm. So liked writing about cities. And so what ended up happening at the very beginning is that I started writing for the Alt Weekly newspaper, which does not exist anymore, called the Montreal Mirror. And Alt Weeklies are really unique publications because they are published once a week. They're not published every day, so they don't do breaking news. They do more community-oriented stories. And so that's how I started getting into writing about communities overall. And then as I kind of went along in my career, I didn't really have like a huge desire to write for a very general audience. Like I was really interested in writing about cities. I was really interested in writing about Montreal specifically. But I wasn't interested in writing about like city hall. Like, so city politics felt a bit limited in terms of how interesting it could possibly be. Like I didn't want to have to be a person who went to city hall meetings every day. Mm-hmm. So over time, and more recently, like I kind of had this opportunity where I could write about these really important city issues, among them transportation, in a way that was accessible to audiences beyond one city, but they talked about pains in a lot of cities. So almost every city with a metropolitan region probably has problems with its buses or metro systems. It probably has traffic problems. It probably doesn't have enough bike lanes. These are universal problems that exist in different cities, and different iterations of these problems exist in different communities as well. So that's kind of what drives this interest. And I'm kind of thankful in a way that it kind of came now, because I went through all of these different parts of my career to get to this point, and to finally find like a specialty, like a thing I really care about and I'm a huge nerd about, kind of helps me see into like phase 2 of what I'm doing with my life in journalism and writing in general. So yeah.
And do you think that Uber is already here, but with the coming of autonomous cars and scooters, I mean, who would have thought that in 2019 we'll talk about scooters in cities? But with all these services coming to rent a mode of transportation, do you think that did you say to yourself, well, I'm set for life, I'm going to have stuff to write about for the next 15 years, and everything's all right now?
Well, people talk about autonomous cars like they're imminent, but they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Experts in the industry will tell you that it will be at least a few decades before fully autonomous cars are on the streets. But people can't see that far. So they really do feel, especially because of car makers like Tesla promising this autonomous future, they really feel like it's going to happen soon. I don't think it's going to happen soon.
You know how it is. Every breakthrough is always 10, 15 years away. So it's...
Yeah, so in that sense, like I guess if it takes 30 years for cars to be fully autonomous, like I'll have 30 years of material where I have me to write about them. It gets a bit boring though, always writing about the same thing. But I think that transportation is like a meeting point of all of these really profound like urban concerns, because transportation isn't just about going to work. It's about access to opportunity. It's about equity. It's about different racial and economic classes being able to have access to these systems just as much as middle class white people do. Like it's not just about
Quebec's government
going to the
efforts
grocery
to
store. It's about
adopt
like
a new
who
law
gets to go to the grocery store in one express bus route.
And
yeah,
I
who has
wanted
to
to ask you about,
to the
because
grocery store.
basically you wrote for an American press agency. And so did you have to adapt your content to correspond to an outside readership? Because there's a way, for example, when you write for, I don't know, La Presse or Radio-Canada or CBC, and you writing for people from Montreal, people from Quebec, you can go on with kind of codes, social codes, political codes, and when did you have to adapt these codes basically to have in mind that you're writing for Americans, for French people, maybe for people from around the world instead of Quebecers, for example?
Yeah, well, I think, yes, you have to be mindful of your audience always, no matter what you write. But because in the past couple of years, I've had so much experience writing for Americans and international audiences, it doesn't feel that difficult.
Okay.
But I do feel like because Quebec is such a weird place and generates so much, weird news, like a disproportionate amount of Canadian news is from Quebec because it's such a strange, interesting, intriguing place for a lot of people. So because I speak French, even though I'm speaking in English right now, I express myself better in English, but I do speak French very well. And because I'm from Quebec, even though I'm an Anglophone, I lived almost my entire life in Quebec, I feel a bit like a cultural translator because I can be an English-speaking person that is understood by Americans in the international community, and I can explain to them these very specific cultural things that happen in a very interesting and unique place. So there's that. But but today I realized that I made a mistake in that article, and it totally ruined my day.
Oh, okay. What happened?
So in that article, because how it works is that obviously I wrote the story and then I sent it to editors, and these editors are American, and they don't know anything about Quebec really. So they sent it back to me with a bunch of changes. I read it quickly, and I was like, okay, looks good. And I realized through that process that I had made a mistake, but I only realized it once one of your colleagues actually told me about it. So that sucked. But basically, the story said that most public workers, civil servants, would be subject to a ban on religious garments. However, that's not necessarily true because some people can still wear them but have their face uncovered. And some are totally banned. Some are grandfathered in. So it's more complicated and nuanced. And the mistake basically said that nurses and bus drivers and some other types of people would be totally prohibited from wearing any religious symbol, but that's not in fact the case. So bus drivers could do, a turban or a hijab. Nurses probably could do the same. But it's more like corrections officers, police officers, like certain types of judges, certain types of public servants who would not be able to wear it at all. So that was the mistake. It was in the minutiae of the law, and to Americans, like the difference is not that big, but to Quebecers, the difference is huge.
Yeah, I mean, even we as Quebecers have problems understanding the language of the law, so I can understand that. American editors
like when I was,
not knowing about
I know,
Quebec.
like when I was writing my correction, I read the bill like 6 times, like the sections that explained who was exempt and who wasn't. I read it like 6 times, just being like, don't get it wrong again, don't get it wrong again. Like, it sucks. Like, it sucks to make a mistake, especially in such a public way. It's not only like you made a mistake and then you fix the mistake. It's like you made the mistake. You got to tell everybody you made a mistake. You fixed the mistake. Like, it sucks to basically stand up and be like, hello, everyone. I made a mistake.
Did they have to send a correction? How did it go?
Yeah. We were just working on the correction.
Okay.
So yes, that sucked.
Well, Tracey Lindeman, thank you very much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Et merci évidemment à tous ceux qui nous écoutent à la maison, sur la route, bref, entre vos 2 oreilles. Retrouvez bien entendu tous nos épisodes sur pieuf.ca, sur SoundCloud et sur iTunes. À bientôt.